The courtroom in Jackson, Mississippi was full of whispers. Reporters wrote in their notebooks, lawyers moved their papers, and the sound of footsteps echoed against the wooden floor. Judge Caroline Miller sat high on the bench, her black robe heavy on her shoulders. To everyone else this was just another trial. But for Judge Caroline Miller, it was about to become personal. The bailiff called out, "The state of Mississippi versus David Carter." Caroline Miller looked down at the file. The charges were serious: armed robbery, assault, resisting arrest. She sighed, feeling the same disappointment she always did. Another man lost to crime, another broken life. But when the door opened and the defendant was brought in, her heart almost stopped. It was David Carter. Not a stranger. Not just a name on paper. David Carter, the boy she had grown up with. The boy who once sat under the oak tree in her backyard and promised her that life would be bigger than the small town they came from. Her throat tightened. Memories came rushing back. She saw them as children, racing bicycles down the streets of Jackson, laughing until their sides hurt. She heard his voice from years ago, whispering dreams about leaving town, about going somewhere people would see them for who they really were. She had left. She had gone to college, to law school, to this bench. But David Carter, but the video was blurry. You could not see the man's face clearly. The defense attorney Lisa Howard stood up next. She was young but strong in her voice. She said the case was not simple. She said David Carter was innocent. She said there was no red hoodie found on him. She told the jury that the arrest was rushed, based only on how David looked. Witnesses came forward. The store clerk said he saw a man in a red hoodie, but admitted he did not see the face clearly. The arresting officer admitted no hoodie was found. He admitted they did not search the area. He admitted David Carter had said he was innocent from the very first moment. The jury shifted in their seats. Doubt was building. Finally David Carter spoke. He stood, chains clinking softly. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room. "I've made mistakes," he said. "I trusted the wrong people. Took wrong turns. But I didn't do this. That night I was just walking home. The police saw me and that was enough for them. I'm tired of being judged before anyone even knows me. I just want the truth to matter." The room fell silent. Even Judge Caroline Miller felt tears pressing at her eyes. The jury left to decide. Hours passed. The courtroom filled and emptied with whispers and nerves. Finally they returned. In the case of the state of Mississippi versus David Carter, we find the defendant not guilty. The room exploded with gasps and murmurs. Judge Caroline Miller banged her gavel to calm the room. David Carter's shoulders dropped with relief, but his face showed no joy, only exhaustion. He was free. But years of struggle could not be erased in one moment. When the courtroom emptied, David Carter walked toward the bench. His voice was low. "You knew me, Caroline. Why didn't you say anything?" Her voice broke. "Because I couldn't. If I had, it would have hurt your case. I had to stay fair." David Carter gave a small, tired smile. "Fair," he said. "The world's never been fair. Not for people like me." Her throat tightened. "You're right," she whispered. "But I will try to change that." He nodded once, then walked out of the courthouse into the fading light. Judge Caroline Miller sat alone in the empty courtroom, her heart heavy. She had followed the law, but she now understood the truth. Justice was not only about verdicts and laws. Justice was about people. And she promised herself she would never forget that again. The next morning the courtroom in Jackson, Mississippi was filled again. Reporters hurried in early, whispering to each other as they set up their pens and cameras. The air was heavy with curiosity. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next in the case of the state of Mississippi versus David Carter. Judge Caroline Miller walked in slowly, her face calm but her heart racing. She had not slept much the night before. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw David Carter as a young boy under the oak tree, laughing and telling her that one day, life would be better. And now, that same boy was standing in front of her, fighting for his freedom. The bailiff called the court to order. David Carter was brought in, shackles rattling with every step. He looked tired but not broken. His eyes met Caroline Miller's for only a second, and then he looked down again. The room went silent. The prosecutor, Mark Douglas, stood tall and confident. He told the jury again that David Carter was guilty. He showed the blurry video one more time. He said the figure in the red hoodie was David Carter. He reminded them that David Carter had a criminal record. Petty theft, trespassing, small charges from years ago. "This man is no stranger to crime," Mark Douglas said firmly. "He belongs behind bars." Judge Caroline Miller felt her stomach twist. She knew the jury would hear those words and doubt would creep in. She kept her face steady, but inside her heart was breaking. Then the defense attorney Lisa Howard stood up. She spoke with calm strength. "The prosecution wants you to believe what is convenient, not what is true," she told the jury. "Yes, David Carter made mistakes in his past. But mistakes do not make him guilty of this crime. Look closely, the video is unclear. The witness never saw a face. And the police never found the red hoodie they claimed he was wearing. This is not justice. This is assumption." The jury leaned forward. Some of them exchanged glances. Doubt was growing stronger. The first witness that day was Officer Brian Hughes, another policeman who had been at the arrest. Lisa Howard questioned him carefully. "Officer Hughes, did you personally see David Carter inside the store that night?" "No," he admitted. "Did you find any stolen money in his pockets?" "No. The cash was found near the store, but not on him." "Did you hear him say anything at the time of arrest?" "Yes," Hughes said reluctantly. "He said he was innocent." The jury stirred. Judge Caroline Miller felt her heart beat faster. Every word chipped away at the case against David Carter. During the lunch break, Caroline Miller sat alone in her chambers. Her assistant, Anna Stevens, walked in quietly. "Judge, are you okay? You look pale." Caroline forced a small smile. "I'm fine, Anna. Just a lot on my mind." But she wasn't fine. How could she be? The boy she had once cared for more than anyone was now sitting in her courtroom, waiting for her to decide his fate. She closed her eyes for a moment and whispered to herself, "Please let the truth come out." When court resumed, the defense brought in a surprise, an expert on video evidence. The man explained that the footage had gaps, that the timestamps had been altered, and that the height of the man in the video did not perfectly match David Carter. The jury leaned even closer, some whispering to each other now. For the first time since the trial began, David Carter lifted his head. His eyes flickered with a small, almost broken hope. Judge Caroline Miller saw it too. And in that quiet moment, she remembered the boy under the oak tree, whispering about a better world. The third day of the trial arrived, and the courtroom in Jackson, Mississippi was more crowded than ever. People lined up outside just to get a seat. Everyone wanted to see David Carter take the stand. Judge Caroline Miller walked in, her black robe flowing behind her. She looked strong and calm on the outside, but inside her heart was pounding. Today she would hear David Carter's voice again after so many years. The defense attorney Lisa Howard stood tall. "Your Honor, the defense calls David Carter to the stand." The room went silent. All eyes turned as David Carter rose slowly. The chains around his ankles clinked with every step. He raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. His hand shook slightly, but his voice was steady when he spoke. Lisa Howard began gently. "David, where were you on the night of the robbery?" David Carter looked at the jury, then at Judge Caroline Miller for a brief second, and then back at his lawyer. "I was at the community center on Pine Street. I was helping a group of kids with their basketball game. I volunteer there every Tuesday and Thursday night." Some jurors nodded. Others whispered to each other. "Do you have anyone who can confirm this?" Lisa asked. "Yes," David said. "Coach Ramirez and at least 10 kids. But the police never asked them." They never checked. They just put me in handcuffs. The jury's faces changed. A few eyebrows raised. Doubt was no longer just a whisper, it was clear. Lisa leaned in. David, tell the jury why you were even near the store where the crime happened. David swallowed hard. Because that's the only road home. I walk past that store every night after the games. That's all. I didn't go inside. I didn't rob anyone. I didn't hurt anyone. He paused, his voice breaking for the first time. All my life, people have looked at me like I was trouble. When I was a teenager, I stole food once because I was hungry. I made mistakes. Paid for them. But I am not the man in that video. I am not a thief anymore. I just want to live a good life. I just want a chance. The courtroom was still. Even the prosecutor, Mark Douglas, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Lisa gave him a moment, then asked softly, David, what do you want this jury to understand about you? David's eyes glistened with tears. That I'm more than my past. That I'm not just some criminal in a file. I'm someone's friend, someone's neighbor, someone who still believes in hope. Please. Don't let them take my life away for something I didn't do. A hush fell over the entire room. A few jurors blinked away tears. Judge Caroline Miller gripped her gavel tightly. Her throat felt dry. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. The boy she once laughed with under the oak tree was still there, in the eyes of the man begging for a second chance. The silence stretched until the prosecutor finally stood up for cross-examination. The tension rose again. The prosecutor, Mark Douglas, stood up slowly, buttoning his dark suit jacket. His eyes were sharp, and his voice carried a heavy tone across the silent courtroom. Mr. Carter, he began, walking closer to the witness stand, you expect this jury to believe that on the very night of the robbery, you just happened to be walking near the store? David Carter looked at him calmly. Yes, sir. That's the only road to my home. Mark Douglas tilted his head. Convenient. Very convenient. But let's not forget, you do have a criminal record, don't you? David's jaw tightened. Yes. From years ago. Years ago. Mark snapped. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not some innocent man. This is someone who has already stolen before. Once a thief, always a thief. Gasps came from the audience. The words cut through the room like a knife. David looked down for a moment, then lifted his head. His voice was steady. Yes, I stole before. I was 17. I was hungry. I had no money, no help. I stole bread and milk. And I went to jail for it. Paid for it. But that doesn't make me guilty today. The jury shifted again, some of them uncomfortable with Mark's tone. Mark narrowed his eyes. You claim you were at the community center. But not a single witness from that place is here today. Isn't it true that you're lying to save yourself? David's voice broke slightly, but he held firm. No, I'm not lying. The kids and Coach Ramirez know I was there. They just haven't been called yet. Judge Caroline Miller leaned forward slightly, her eyes fixed on Mark. She could feel the unfair weight of his questions, but she had to stay neutral. Mark smirked and leaned closer. Tell me, Mr. Carter, why should anyone believe you? You have a history of lying, stealing, and running from the law. David's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't look away. His voice came out low, but strong enough for the whole court to hear. Because people can change. Because I'm not the same scared boy I was years ago. I've been trying to live right. I've been trying to be better. If you can't believe that, then you don't believe in second chances. The courtroom went completely still. Even the jury seemed frozen, caught between the harshness of the prosecutor's words and the raw truth in David's voice. Mark Douglas frowned, sensing the jury was slipping from his control. He adjusted his tie and stepped back. No further questions. David Carter sat quietly, his hands trembling. For the first time in the trial, the jurors looked at him not as a criminal, but as a man. Judge Caroline Miller's chest rose and fell heavily. She struck her gavel once. We will take a short recess. As the jury filed out, Caroline's eyes met David's for a brief second. In that silent exchange, she saw not just the boy she once knew, but the man fighting to prove he still deserved a future. After the short recess, the courtroom filled with even more tension. People whispered from every corner, waiting to see what the defense would do next. Judge Caroline Miller took her seat again, her face calm, though her heart raced with every beat. Defense attorney Lisa Howard stood up with quiet confidence. Your Honor, the defense would like to call our next witness, Coach Miguel Ramirez. The doors opened, and a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a weathered face walked in. He wore a simple shirt and carried himself with quiet strength. The moment he stepped into the courtroom, David Carter lifted his head. His eyes filled with relief. Coach Ramirez raised his hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. Lisa Howard smiled gently. Coach, can you tell the court where you were on the night of June 14th? At the Pine Street Community Center, he said firmly. We had our usual basketball practice with the kids. And was David Carter there with you? Lisa asked. Coach Ramirez nodded without hesitation. Yes, he was there the whole evening. He helps me coach the boys. They look up to him. A murmur spread through the courtroom. The jurors leaned in. Lisa continued. Did you personally see David Carter at the exact time the robbery supposedly happened? Yes, Coach Ramirez answered without pause. At 9:15, when the police claimed the robbery happened, David was on the court with the kids, helping them run drills. I remember clearly because one of the boys tripped, and David helped him up. I checked the time on the gym clock. The prosecutor, Mark Douglas, shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. Lisa turned to the jury. So, David Carter could not have been at the store because he was here with you at that time? Exactly, Coach Ramirez said. There's no way he could have done it. The courtroom buzzed louder now. Reporters scribbled faster. The jury exchanged looks, some nodding slowly. But Lisa wasn't finished. Coach, can you tell the jury what kind of man David Carter has been since you've known him? Coach Ramirez looked directly at the jurors. David made mistakes when he was young, yes. But for the last 2 years he's been giving his time, his energy, and his heart to those kids. He shows up every week. He encourages them to stay out of trouble, to focus on school, to dream bigger. He tells them not to repeat his mistakes. That's the David Carter I know. The jury's eyes softened. One woman in the front row dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Judge Caroline Miller gripped her gavel tightly. Her heart was beating so fast she thought the whole room could hear it. She saw the truth shining in Coach Ramirez's words, and she saw David Carter sitting straighter now, his hope slowly returning. The prosecutor rose for cross-examination, his face tense. Coach Ramirez, you say you saw him at 9:15. How can you be so sure? Memory plays tricks. Coach Ramirez didn't flinch. I'm sure because I live for those kids. I notice everything that happens on that court. And I'd swear on my life. David Carter was there. Innocent men should not rot in prison for crimes they didn't commit. The jury buzzed again, this time stronger, louder. The weight of doubt had shifted. For the first time since the trial began, it wasn't the prosecutor in control. It was the truth. The next morning the courtroom in Jackson, Mississippi was so full that people had to stand along the walls. Word had spread quickly after Coach Ramirez's testimony. Everyone wanted to see what surprise the defense might bring next. Judge Caroline Miller walked in, her robe flowing, her face calm. But inside her heart beat fast. She could feel that something big was coming. Defense attorney Lisa Howard stood up. Your Honor, the defense would like to call a very important witness. He may be young, but his voice deserves to be heard. We call Michael Turner. The doors opened, and a small boy no older than 10 walked in nervously. He wore a clean white shirt and clutched a school notebook to his chest. His mother guided him to the witness stand, whispering, "You'll be okay, honey." The jury leaned forward. Even the reporters put their pens down for a moment, surprised. Michael raised his hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. His feet barely touched the floor. Lisa Howard knelt slightly so her eyes were level with his. "Michael, can you tell us what you were doing on the night of June 14th? Michael's voice trembled at first, but he grew stronger as he spoke. "I was at the community center. I play basketball every Tuesday. Mr. David helps me practice my shots. That night I fell and hurt my knee. Mr. David picked me up and told me not to cry. He even gave me a Band-Aid from the first aid kit." The courtroom went completely silent. Lisa smiled gently. "Do you remember what time that was?" Michael nodded quickly. "Yes, it was right before my mom came to pick me up. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 9:15. Mr. David was with me. He couldn't have been anywhere else." Gasps filled the room. Some jurors exchanged shocked glances. Lisa stood. "Thank you, Michael. You've been very brave." But the prosecutor, Mark Douglas, stood up sharply. His voice was cold. "Michael, you're just a child. Are you sure you remember correctly? Maybe it wasn't that night. Maybe it was another." Michael's small voice grew firm. "No, sir. Remember. Because that was the night I made my first basket in the game." Mr. David clapped the loudest. "I'll never forget that night." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Even the toughest jurors now looked shaken. David Carter lowered his head, tears slipping from his eyes. He whispered, "Thank you, Michael." Judge Caroline Miller's throat tightened. She had to blink back her own tears. In that tiny voice, in that pure truth, she heard something stronger than any lawyer's argument. Innocence. She struck her gavel once. "Order in the court." But her voice trembled slightly, betraying the storm in her heart. For the first time, everyone in that room felt it. The case was turning, and the truth was breaking through the cracks. The courtroom in Jackson was still buzzing after little Michael's testimony. People whispered in disbelief. Some jurors wiped their eyes, moved by the boy's courage. But Prosecutor Mark Douglas wasn't ready to give up. His jaw was tight, his eyes burning with determination. He stood and faced the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said firmly, "don't let your emotions fool you. A child may tug at your heart, but facts don't lie. And I have one more piece of evidence." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Everyone leaned forward. Even Judge Caroline Miller felt her chest tighten. She had thought the trial was tilting toward David Carter, but now, she wasn't sure. Mark Douglas signaled to the bailiff. A sealed envelope was carried to the front. Inside was a set of photographs. He held them up one by one for the jury to see. "This," he declared, his voice echoing, "was taken just minutes after the robbery. A man in dark clothing near the scene, carrying a bag of cash." The jurors stared at the grainy photo. The figure was blurred, but the outline, it looked a lot like David. The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispers again. Lisa Howard, the defense attorney, jumped to her feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This so-called evidence was never disclosed to us before trial." Judge Miller's face grew stern. "Mr. Douglas, explain yourself. Why is this evidence being introduced only now?" Mark's lips curled in a half-smile. "Your Honor, the photos were recovered late from a security camera nearby. We simply received them yesterday. The people deserve the truth." The judge frowned deeply, but the jury's eyes were already glued to the pictures. David Carter's hands shook as he saw the photo. His lips parted, his voice barely a whisper. "That's not me. That's not me." Lisa leaned close to him. "Stay strong, David. We'll fight this." But in that moment the entire room felt the shift. Hope that had risen with Michael's innocent voice now trembled under the weight of those blurry photographs. Judge Miller struck her gavel hard. "Order. This trial will proceed fairly. Both sides will be heard fully." She looked at the jury, her heart heavy. She wanted to believe in David's innocence. She wanted the truth. But now, with new evidence clouding the air, she knew this trial was about to enter its darkest chapter yet. The next morning the courtroom in Jackson was silent when Judge Caroline Miller entered. Everyone felt the tension in the air. The photographs shown by prosecutor Mark Douglas had shaken the jury. David Carter sat at the defense table, his eyes red from a sleepless night. His hands trembled, but Lisa Howard leaned closer and whispered, "Trust me. We're not finished." Lisa rose slowly, her voice steady. "Your Honor, the defense is ready to respond to the photographs presented yesterday, and we will prove they are not what the prosecution claims." The jury leaned forward. Reporters lifted their pens again. Lisa called her first witness, Dr. Emily Rhodes, a forensic video analyst from New Orleans. She was calm, confident, carrying a laptop. She began, "These photographs were taken from a convenience store's outside camera. But when examined carefully, the timestamps don't match. The images were captured 2 hours before the crime even took place." The jury gasped. Mark Douglas shot up. "Objection. Speculation." Judge Miller raised a hand. "Overruled. Continue, Dr. Rhodes." Emily clicked a button, and the grainy photos appeared on a large screen for everyone to see. She zoomed in. "Notice the shadows," she explained. "The robbery happened at 9:30 p.m. But these shadows are long like sunset, closer to 7:15 p.m. And look closely at the man's build. He's shorter than Mr. Carter by at least 4 inches. Murmurs filled the room. Some jurors nodded slowly, doubt creeping back into their eyes. Lisa wasn't done. She called Michael back to the stand. The boy walked bravely to the witness box again. "Michael," Lisa asked gently, "you said you saw Mr. Carter at 9:15 that night. If these pictures were taken earlier, could it have been someone else?" Michael looked at the photos carefully, then shook his head. "That's not Mr. David. His shoulders are bigger. And Mr. David was with me when it was dark outside. These pictures look like they were taken when the sun was still up." The jury broke into whispers. David's chest rose and fell with relief. For the first time in days, his eyes glimmered with hope. Lisa turned to the jury, her voice powerful. "The prosecution tried to use shadows and blur to destroy a man's life. But facts don't lie. And the fact is, David Carter was not there." Mark Douglas's face burned red with frustration. He slammed his folder shut but said nothing. Judge Miller struck her gavel. "Order. The jury will disregard emotional outbursts. But the defense's point has been noted." David bowed his head, whispering softly, "Thank you, God." The tide was turning once again. The truth was clawing its way back into the light. The courtroom in Jackson was heavy with silence after the defense tore apart the photographs. Jurors whispered to one another, some shaking their heads. For the first time it looked like David Carter might walk free. But prosecutor Mark Douglas wasn't ready to lose. His eyes were sharp, his voice louder than usual. He stood quickly. "Your Honor, the state has one final witness. Someone who saw everything that night." Gasps filled the room. Judge Caroline Miller raised an eyebrow. "Proceed, Mr. Douglas. But this better not be another surprise." The back doors opened. A tall man in a worn jacket walked in slowly, his steps heavy. He kept his cap low over his face until he reached the stand. When he lifted his head, the courtroom froze. It was Ray Johnson, a man from David's old neighborhood, known for trouble. His face carried scars, his eyes cold. David stiffened. He whispered to Lisa, "I know him. He used to run with gangs. He hates me." Ray raised his hand and swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor wasted no time. "Mr. Johnson, did you see David Carter on the night of June 14th? Ray leaned forward, his voice rough. "Yeah, I saw him. I saw David run out of that store with cash in his hands." The jury gasped again. Some leaned back, stunned. David's face went pale. "That's a lie!" he shouted before Lisa tugged on his sleeve to stay quiet. Lisa stood quickly. "Objection. This witness was never disclosed before trial." Mark smirked. He came forward only yesterday. The people deserve the truth, Your Honor. Judge Miller frowned, her gavel tapping lightly. Objection is overruled. The witness may continue. Ray looked directly at the jury, his voice steady. I was across the street. I saw him push the clerk, grab the cash and run. I know David Carter. And I'll never forget his face. The words hit the courtroom like thunder. Some jurors stared at David with doubt in their eyes again. The hope that had returned during Michael's testimony now seemed to tremble on weak legs. Lisa clenched her fists, anger flashing in her eyes. She knew Ray Johnson wasn't telling the truth. She could see it in his face, in the way he avoided David's stare. But convincing the jury would be the hardest battle yet. Judge Miller struck her gavel. The defense will have their chance to cross-examine. But let me remind everyone, this courtroom demands order. David lowered his head, whispering in pain. Why is this happening to me? And as the gavel echoed through the room, the trial reached its most dangerous point. The courtroom in Jackson, Mississippi was silent as Lisa Howard rose to cross-examine Ray Johnson. Her eyes were calm, but inside her heart raced. She knew this moment could decide David Carter's fate. Mr. Johnson, Lisa began softly, you say you saw David Carter rob the store. Is that correct? Ray nodded confidently. Yes, I saw him. Clear as day. Lisa stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. Mr. Johnson, were you wearing a hat that night? Ray hesitated. Yes, a cap. And it was dark outside, correct? Yes, he muttered. Lisa turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, if it was dark and the witness had a cap covering his face, how can he be sure of what he saw? Some jurors shifted uncomfortably. Lisa continued, pacing slowly. Mr. Johnson, have you ever had disagreements with David Carter? Ray's jaw tightened. Yes, but that's not important. Lisa nodded, her voice rising slightly. It is important. Because personal grudges can make someone lie. And isn't it true that you've held anger against David since high school? Ray swallowed. His eyes darted around. I don't know what you mean. Lisa's eyes locked on his. You mean you can't tell the jury the truth? Or you're afraid of telling the truth? You've had a reason to lie, haven't you? The courtroom went quiet. Even the prosecutor looked tense. Lisa pressed on. Where were you when the robbery actually happened? Ray's face paled. I was at home. Watching TV. I didn't. Lisa smiled slightly. Ah, so you didn't see David Carter rob the store at all. You just assumed because of old grudges and rumors. Ray looked down, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Judge Caroline Miller struck her gavel. Order. The witness may step down. Ray shuffled away, shoulders slumped. The jury whispered among themselves, shock written on every face. David Carter's chest rose and fell with relief. Tears streamed down his face. He whispered softly, Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. Lisa nodded, her eyes glinting with determination. Stay strong. The truth has won. The courtroom waited, holding its collective breath. Judge Miller stood, her gavel ready. Her voice was steady but warm. In the case of the state of Mississippi versus David Carter, the jury has reached a verdict. Will the defendant please rise? David stood, his hands trembling, his heart pounding. Judge Miller read aloud slowly. We find the defendant not guilty. Gasps, cheers, and tears filled the room. David collapsed into his chair, overwhelmed. Michael Turner jumped up and hugged him. Coach Ramirez's eyes shone with pride. Even Lisa let out a quiet sigh of relief. Judge Miller looked at David, her own eyes moist. You are free to go, Mr. Carter. Justice has been served. David stepped forward, his legs shaking, and whispered, I can finally start over. Outside the courthouse, the sun shone bright over Jackson, Mississippi. David Carter took a deep breath, feeling the warmth on his face. After years of struggle, misunderstanding, and pain, he was finally free. Judge Caroline Miller watched from the steps, her hand resting on the gavel. She thought of the boy she had once known under the oak tree and smiled softly. Some battles are bigger than the law. They are battles for truth, courage, and second chances. And today truth had won.